It's official, and I never thought I would say this, but Texas and Oklahoma are in the SEC, scheduling for a starting date of 2025. We're going to talk about that and everything else coming around college football in this segment. Dean Legge from Dog Post, making you a smarter Georgia fan. I'm going to try to make you a smarter college football fan the best I can because there's a lot to go through here. Will Georgia and Auburn continue to play? Will games like that, Alabama, Tennessee? I think there's a pretty good chance there will, but there are really no rules right now in the ever-changing tectonic plates of college football's television wars. The current schedule is that Texas and Oklahoma will join the league in 2025. But in my discussions with a lot of people around the league and in television, they are skeptical that that will happen. They think that the Big 12 will probably fall apart. I don't know about sooner than later, but that it will fall apart. The question is when and what does that mean for the SEC? There's a few things that have to happen first. Number one, the SEC and Disney have to get a new contract that takes into effect with Texas and Oklahoma. Now, they don't have to do that. CBS never did. But I'm pretty sure that this has been in the making for a while, no matter what the attorneys say. So you could see this as soon as a year from now. I mean, I've got people asking me when do I expect Oklahoma and Texas to play in the league, and I said I right now expect them to be at 2022 Media Days, wherever that is for the SEC. So that's my suspicion. I don't know that that will be true. And Texas and Oklahoma SEC in 2022 makes it as competitive a league as perhaps it's ever been, because you'd have Oklahoma in there, Georgia, obviously Alabama, LSU, the Gators, everybody. So it's going to be a rough league when those guys get in. The question is when, as I just discussed. It will certainly be by 2025, but I think it will be before then. So then you say, okay, well, how are you going to divvy this thing up? That is the tricky part. I think that's the part that people have not really yet discussed. So in the SEC right now, you have two divisions of 7 teams. And there's different ways to handle that in terms of how you would split this up. I mean, for instance, Missouri is in the West right now. Missouri is in the East. Would you leave them in the East, or would you move them to the West? If you brought Alabama or Auburn to the East, or both, in theory, would that settle things out? I don't know. I think there's a lot of people that would like to stick with divisions because it gives you a round robin in those divisions, and it also gives you the ability to have a championship game that's not got a lot of confusion about itself, like we've seen in the past with the Big 12. Divisions is the cleanest and easiest way to go about doing things. But to have an SEC East that would feature Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and Auburn would be, I don't know. I mean, then on the West, you'd be talking, in some years, just about LSU and Oklahoma, the way that things have rattled around in the West lately. But I really don't know how. That's the part that's going to be the trickiest part, because if you send Missouri to the West where they belong, that would mean that somebody would, and that at that moment you would have 6 schools in the East, and I think whatever the number would be, 10 in the West. Well, that wouldn't work. So you would send Alabama and Auburn to the East to balance it out. Geographically speaking, that would make the most sense. There are 2 schools that are west of Auburn, and that's Vanderbilt and Missouri. So the divisions thing may still survive. We're just going to have to see. And the next topic goes hand in hand, which is the schedule. Whatever your division is going to predicate how who you play. This notion of pods, I don't think that should be dismissed. I mean, I think that has got momentum, but there's some working out to be done. For instance, are you going to add a 9th game? If you do that, then obviously that benefits the TV partner I don't think a ninth game is out of the question with all the money and revenue that is going to be produced here. But with that ninth game, does that mean that you can go into pods? Georgia, Florida, Vanderbilt, and Kentucky, Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, and somebody, Texas A&M. Oh, I mean, there's different ways to do it to where like LSU and Texas A&M could be in one pod, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma and Texas in another. There's ways that you could do it to where traditional rivals, Auburn and Alabama, are in the same thing. But you'd start losing games that matter a lot, like Georgia, Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, LSU, Bama, LSU. Well, really any LSU game. Those games stand a chance to go away in pod systems. I think if you're Georgia, you can't have it every way. I mean, you can't keep Florida and Auburn and they be in the same pod, because that pod would probably wind up being Georgia, Florida, Auburn, and Alabama. I mean, that's just not going to happen. So there's some work to be done. If I had to guess, my suspicion is that the league will figure out how to create divisions, because with folks I've talked to inside this thing, the pod situation, they say, yeah, that'll work, but you're not going to have an SEC semifinals. That would be too many games, and you start talking about playing 17 games to win the national championship. They just don't think that is something that will happen. Again, there are no rules. We could see everything go away. I don't think it will, though. I mean, I think the one game that's really in the two games particularly, Georgia, Auburn, and Alabama, Tennessee, those games are definitely, if there's a chopping block, they're on it. The other complicated thing is, who do you close the season with? And this goes back to the divisions and the pods situation. I mean, Texas and Oklahoma are not going to end the season against one another. Georgia and Florida are not going to end the season against one another. That's not what it is. I mean, Texas and OU have, in the near future, have out-of-state in-conference rivalries. So those two play that game, though, in October. Who will Texas close with? Well, Texas A&M, naturally. That means, who does LSU close with? Well, right now, we don't know. Because in the West, there's not been a natural person for LSU to close with. That could become Oklahoma. Totally. It is also possible that you see a shifting of the out-of-state, the in-state out-of-conference rivalries to the beginning of the season, if they exist in 20 years. You could see Tech Georgia opening the year. That is totally possible. I think that is gone from 5% chance to 15 or 20% chance. And that's not out of the question at all, because the league is trying to figure out how they can do this. Would you possibly send Oklahoma to the East? I mean, if you did that and stuck Texas in the West, then that would balance things out, and you wouldn't have to worry as much about things, because then you'd have a crossover with OU and Texas. You'd be able to still do a lot of things if you added a ninth game. There's a lot that you could do there, okay? That might be the simplest solution, is to say, we're going to do divisions. We're going to put Texas or Oklahoma in the East and the other ones in the West, and we're just going to go play. And we can close the season however people want, this, that, and the other. In that scenario, you would have Texas and A&M in the West playing a big rivalry game the same day as, well, possibly on Thanksgiving. But you get my point. That is a total possibility. I don't know how Oklahoma would close, but it would probably be, and this would not be fun for them, with Missouri. Now, look, they're not different than Georgia, etc. They can still play Oklahoma State to close the year. That's the best part about this, is it would just be the league bringing one more, power team that has an out-of-conference in-state rival into the league. I mean, Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, and South Carolina already have that. So that wouldn't be the end of the world. You'd stick them, you could stick Oklahoma in the East and Texas in the West, and roll like that. The pods, I think there's no question that TV is going to want to see more power games. So, you could see a pod system in divisions. That's completely possible, where you get pods within a division that guarantee that Georgia, Florida, and in the scenario I'm laying out, Georgia, Florida, and Oklahoma play one another every single year. Auburn, Alabama, Texas, and LSU play one another every single year. Auburn might not play Arkansas, but they could play Vanderbilt. There's a lot of different mechanisms by which this can be handled. I think a 9-game schedule is totally coming up. Whether how quick that will happen, I'm not sure. You have a lot of, quote, guaranteed games, particularly games in Atlanta with Gary Stokan in the Peach Bowl, that are not going to quickly and easily be gotten out of. Georgia plays Oregon there next year. Alabama plays Miami there this year. Georgia, Clemson in 2024. Those are not games that the league is going to want to have go away. But Georgia, UCLA, that game might not happen. That game's right around the corner. It might not happen. So that's what we're getting into here. But Texas and Oklahoma coming in brings the most powerful 7 schools, 7 of the most powerful 14 schools in the country. It's probably a higher percentage than 7 and 14. But, if you're not talking about Notre Dame, Michigan, and Ohio State, they're probably in the SEC. Clemson's had a great run. This is not Clemson's traditional home. You could say the same about Florida State, maybe if you swap one ACC team in for the other. But the fact of the matter is that these are the bulk of the traditional powers. The other question is, and this is perhaps more conspiratorial, I don't know that this is going to be what happens, but is the SEC going to add more power teams? Is that something that you could see? Could you see a 20-team SEC league that produces, 2 division champions? I don't know. But right now, as it stands, just going through it, it seems to me like the easiest thing to do is to go with 2 divisions with Texas and Oklahoma split. I'm not suggesting that's what's going to happen, but these pods things, I just don't know how you guarantee yourself a division champion unless there are divisions. And you're also, the NCAA doesn't really matter at all, but you're also going to be running afoul of their rules, if they even exist, by trying to have a championship without divisions and all this stuff. If you have 12 or more teams, there's all sorts of bylaws. You'd have to have their help, and they do it, but there's a lot of problems that are involved with the pod system. I think if you're using the pods as a scheduling mechanism, that's a different ballgame. At the end of the day, Texas and Oklahoma coming in, everybody's going to say, hey, welcome to the club. This is a different level. This is a different beast. No one cares that you're Texas. Chill that out. And let's just see what happens moving forward. But I do think it's going to be a great time for the league. And things are going to change. You might not have Georgia, Auburn in the future. You might not have LSU, Florida in the future. But you are going to have 2 huge powerhouses and a lot more money to lick your wounds. Dean Legge from Dog Post. We'll see you on the website.